And we are live on Facebook. Good evening, Facebook world. We are live. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. It is January the 6th, the big day in our country. We're so glad that you could hang out with us this evening. We're on part 3 of 4 of the cattle long range plan that the RCAF Board of Directors put together. And we're happy to have some very special guests with us tonight. We have 2 board members and one of our favorite RCAF speakers and experts on the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. We'll start with you, Dave Hyde. Dave Hyde, you represent Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Thank you so much for being on this evening.
You're welcome.
And then we will go to Brett Kinsey. Brett, you're our board member representing, you live in South Dakota. You're a backgrounder in Gregory, South Dakota, you and your brother. You represent South Dakota, North Dakota, and Nebraska. Thank you so much for being on tonight.
Good to be here.
And then we have Tracy Hunt. Tracy, you're a Wyoming rancher. You're a recovering attorney, and you are an expert on the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And we're so thankful to have you on tonight. I know you had Wi-Fi problems out at your ranch, and you made a real effort to be with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
You may want to turn your volume up just a bit.
I'll try it.
And then we have Bill Bullard. Bill, of course, is the CEO of RCAF USA, our registered lobbyist, our fearless leader, and we're so thankful to have you tonight, Bill. Thank you so much for providing leadership.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
So tonight we're going to discuss the last 2 points of the cattle industry long-range plan. I am just going to read a couple of these points, and we're just going to, this is a roundtable popcorn discussion with producers all across, we're going to have producers commenting tonight on our Facebook. If you're watching, please share this video. Feel free to answer questions as we go, and we'll try to get to some of your questions. Point number 5 is that we want to strengthen the U.S. cattle industry's role in achieving long-lasting food security in the U.S. Number 1, restore the U.S. Department of Agriculture's mission to strengthen the United States family farm and ranch system of cattle production. Number 2, educate members of Congress on how United States food security is strengthened by refocusing on policies that promote and support the domestic cattle chain. Dave Hyde, let's start with you. I know that you have had some conversations with some elected representatives in your area. Talk about what it really means to be a citizen lobbyist and a producer, because a lot of times producers really don't like to get involved in the political process.
No, and I was kind of intimidated at the beginning also, but for anybody out there that's listening, we need you to call your senators and congressmen, and don't be afraid, because most of them's going to be going to voicemail anyhow. And over the last few months, I've had a really good discussions with Senator Rob Portman's office. I've got in contact with their agricultural liaison. It's when we started pushing the 3693's Senator Tester's and Grassley's bill. And at first she was a little leery about it. And then she started calling me, and we, had some good discussions on it. And then the mandatory price reporting came in, and she wanted to know all about that, and trying to explain to her how the captive supply is killing us. I mean, there's a lot of people that out there working in government, they haven't a clue what's going on in the cattle industry. And we need to put all of our voices together and contact these senators and congressmen and let them know what's going on out there.
Well, that's absolutely true. Brett Kinsey, you've probably done as good a job as anybody in citizen lobbying and really just digging into the process. Talk to us about encouraging really other producers as to how to get involved and get their congressional delegation involved.
Well, when Dave says, that these folks don't, yet they haven't a clue. That's what he said. And really that's a part of what we hope to accomplish with this long range plan, is that, it's you can make as much or as little of it as you want, but it does dive down in several layers deep. It starts with a mission and a vision, and then we move on to strategies. And I mean, the first point is to restore the USDA's mission to strengthen U.S. family farm and ranch system of cattle production. We're going to have to start pushing ourselves to them too, rather than just these legislators. I have not done that. I'm in touch with my state senators and my representatives, but we're going to have to take it on ourselves to go to them. And on ourselves, I don't mean our calf. I mean all of us. If we want to preserve this way of life, it's important when you call that, don't get yourself all riled up before you call. I get some phone calls of people that are riled up when they call, and of course I'm responsive to that, but they might not be in Washington, D.C. Ask them what the weather's like. I mean, they're people too. They're people just like us. So when you call out there, visit with them a little bit and tell them what you do. And these calls, it's like Dave said, the first one's the hardest one. And their staff rotates. So it's not like you're making best friends, unless you get to a solid ag aid. But, you have to kind of create a relationship and tell them why you're calling. And it doesn't have to be eloquent. You don't have to throw a bunch of numbers out, but it's your job to show them that you care and that you expect them to represent you too. I mean, there's different perspectives in this country, but that's really what this long range cattle plan is it is a checklist that you can go down, that people that might not be familiar with agriculture, food security. What we're going to talk about tonight is being standardized, essentially, is the gist of what big ag and the globalists are trying to do to us. They're trying to make us all the same, even little widgets. But what makes American agriculture so special is that we're so diverse. I don't do it the same way Dave does it. I don't do it the same way Tracy Hunt does it. I don't do it the same way they do it in Montana or Kansas. And that's what gives us the redundancy and the resiliency. And that's what we have to move towards. So don't be afraid to visit with these people and state your case, but just be a gentleman and a lady about it, and they'll listen. But it's call volume that makes it work.
And along those lines, it's call volume, encouraging them to start focusing on the domestic supply chain, because only then are you going to begin strengthening rural communities if you can strengthen the prosperity of those who are at the foundation of the live cattle supply chain. And that's why the plan focuses on this. Is we need calls to Congress saying, we've lost sight of the fact that we need to be rebuilding what we've lost right here in America. We need to strengthen the supply chain so as to have a more economically vibrant industry that will support the rural communities that have been hollowed out.
Well, there have been some in our industry that have actually testified before Congress that beef is beef. And so, Dave Hyde, I don't know in Ohio if that's how producers feel in Ohio, that beef is beef. Brett Kinsey, either of you can jump in, or Tracy Hunt if you want to jump in. But, beef is not beef. And we import from over 22 countries. This globalization, the streamlining of this supply chain so that these packers can source from this global supply chain. What does that do to your bottom line, Brett or Dave, either of you, when your standards are different than, say, Mexico or Canada, because you have veterinary feed directives, you have your standard of production, your cost of production is different. How do you feel about that? Because it really puts us on an uneven playing field with those other imports coming in.
One of the things that I find really discouraging here in Ohio, and a lot of the packers are requiring the BQA. Now, the BQA is a good program, but it started out to be an incentive program, and now it's a deduction program. So I've got a lot of friends and neighbors around here, and they've never taken it. And every time they take their calves to the sale barn, that's the first thing they ask for is your certification papers. And if they don't have it, they get docked for them at the sale barns.
Wow. I had not actually heard that they were starting to dock for BQA, because the last I had heard, of course, it's completely voluntary, right? That's what they always say, oh, it's voluntary. But of course, when they start mandating those things, then those premiums go away, which of course is what they're trying to do with mandatory RFID, right? Is in those premiums.
And if we lead into the mandatory ID and the premise numbers, I can see a major amount of cow-calf producers in Eastern Ohio calling it quits. It's just too much work. They don't have the facilities to put them in. And, you know, they don't want the government to know what's going on their property, you know. And there's a lot of guys that have, you know, a fair number of cattle and moving them from county to county. And they're creating a lot more paperwork.
Mm-hmm. Before we jump to you, Tracy, I want to go real quick to you, Brett, about that cookie cutter approach that you were talking about. How do we combat this cookie cutter approach that they're really trying to just slam down our throats? Is there anything we can do at this point?
Restore a competitive market. It's really it's the foundation of American exceptionalism, a competitive market, because it makes you want to try, it makes you want to move forward. You know, the competitive market that rewards superior production and maybe has a deduction for lesser production is what makes you want to strive for that superior product. Mm-hmm. You know, what's special about cattle is I think that we're all, maybe me more so than 5 years ago, now that we finished some cattle, but I think that we all realize we respect our cattle and our environment, but we realize that we're growing food. And that's what makes us so passionate about a lot of these regulations. You know, some regulations are put on us and it's nothing but a political game of big ag that gets us into it. And we're not going to sidetrack onto that, but other regulations are good. You know, we don't want to dump our sewage. John Shaban talked about it very eloquently. You know, America is where you can have a feedlot here and across the fence, your kids can swim in a pond because that sewage isn't running into the pond. And, you know, America, we should be proud of the quality that we produce. We should be proud of the manner in which we produce it. And, you know, that it's just our diversity is our strength. And that competitive market is what drives innovation. It's what set the world on fire. You know, the American ideal of a competitive market is what changed the world. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's a 10-minute answer to a 10-second question. Thanks.
Oh, but it is so good. So then how did we get here, Tracy Hunt? How did we, with this American exceptionalism, why did the industry move towards these global standards? How are we in a position where the industry has embraced these global standards, this sustainability word, which we just see everywhere? And how do we push back? How do we push back against this globalization?
Well, Tatum, first, thanks for having me on your show. And I'm humbled in my heart to be in the same company as these folks that are on here with me. You know, I think when you talk about the industry, you have to realize, and I think maybe everybody does, or they know it, but they don't articulate it in their own discussions that they have with themselves. But there's two industries. There's the cattle industry and there's the beef industry, and they meet right there on the kill floor and at the abattoir. And what's good for the beef industry is not necessarily good for what's good for the cattle industry. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, you just look at the genius of that goes on at your sale barn. It is just incredible to see that 2-year-old cows and young heifers and 5-year-old cows, they all end up being pretty much the same price after you figure in all the expenses that go with them. and after the additional their efficiencies and what's good about them and what's bad about them, and just somehow these folks that, and they're not extra special people, they just know what their costs are, they know what they can do with what they've got. And that's the genius of what I think it was Adam Smith, a famous economist, called the invisible hand. And it's what makes the free market work. And so you talk about the industry, it's the packing industry is so concentrated, and these people have such a cookie cutter operation. That is Cargill and Tyson and JBS and National or Marfrig, they all are doing about exactly the same thing. And different than what Brett was talking about, where we all do it a little bit differently, they do it all the same. And what's good for them is to have a reliable, constant product that they can buy as cheap as possible. And in that, they are, when they control 85% of the market, four packers control 85% of the market. That's, if you can imagine that. And they are in a position to where they can talk with one another, and they can set forth the terms of production, and they can decide what they're going to do to people that don't comply. And that's exactly what they're doing. And the way that they intend to do that more and more all the time is with mandatory radio frequency identification tags. And they're going to agree on the standards that they're going to impose on producers. That means social and environmental standards. And if they're going to require producers to get to hire third-party verifiers to come out on their place with a checklist put forward by the packers, and they're going to have to comply, or they're in a position now with the technology that's available to blackball the cattle that they say don't comply. And the standards can be as arbitrary as they want. They don't have to be meaningful standards. They just have to be some standard by which they can discriminate against producers. So, always never lose sight of the fact that producers that's a different industry than the beef industry.
Mm-hmm.
We're cattlemen. They have an entirely different commodity.
Some would say it's definitely a David and Goliath battle. And I know, and we're so honored that you're one of the plaintiffs in the RFID case, along with Kenny and Roxy Fox. Why is it important for producers really to take a stand? And with everything going on in the world that's happening right now, I mean, today is an example. Can we push back against these global standards to a point where we can gain our industry back? I mean, do you think that we're in that position?
We absolutely have to push back. And, I want to take a minute to recognize Harriet Hageman and our attorney in the case. And all the great work that she and the NCLA, the law firm that she works for, all the great work that they've done. It would be unfair if they weren't fairly recognized for the great work that they've done on behalf of the American cattle producer. But the way that you push back, the first thing you have to do is you have to fight that RFID. And the cattle, the beef packing businesses want mandatory RFID, and they can enforce it through the market, as I was discussing, but they would rather have the USDA require that, because it just makes it that much easier, and that there are criminal consequences if people don't comply. So the first thing you have to do is the lobbying efforts that Brett and Dave were talking about, and Bill. You have to lobby your congressman to confront those RFID requirements, though, from a legal point of view, from a legal requirement. You have to confront that, because once they have that mandatory RFID, then they are in a position to discriminate against individual producers. And that is so important. So the first thing you got to do is fight RFID anytime you can. You can use RFID if you want to, but those are your records. Those records should not belong to the USDA, and they certainly shouldn't belong to the meat packers.
Mm-hmm. So I asked this question last week to Shad Sullivan. It's good to know what our enemy says, right? What those on the opposite side say. And they say, how few are calf want mandatory country of origin labeling, but not want mandatory RFID?
Well, that's a game you can, you can play that game. How can you, NCBA wants mandatory beef checkoff dollars, but they don't want mandatory country of origin labeling. That's a word game. There is already voluntary country of origin labeling. Packers can label if they want to. They don't want to because it doesn't suit their purpose. They would rather source their beef from wherever and not tell you about it and get it as cheap as they can, and to the detriment of the American producers. They don't want mandatory country of origin labeling. They've already got voluntary country of origin labeling. And regarding the RFID, there's voluntary country or voluntary RFID now. You can RFID, but those are just two entirely different discussions, and they like to confuse the issue by comparing one to the other. But you can do the same. You can make the same comparison with them. You got to be careful not to fall into their word game.
Well, Bill, let's talk about one of these points talks about foot and mouth disease. So we're going to shift a little bit, even though, it has to do with traceability. It has to do with disease traceability. We want in our long range plan, ban all imports from countries that are not declared free of foot and mouth disease, including from countries declared free of foot and mouth disease only because they vaccinate, as well as ban the introduction of any live foot and mouth virus onto the U.S. mainland for any purpose. What would an outbreak of foot and mouth disease do to the U.S. cattle population?
Well, the USDA and Homeland Security have estimated that it could cost anywhere from $9 to $50 billion. It'll shut down commerce anywhere that an outbreak is found. And like Brett talked about, if producers are trying to achieve a superior product and achieve excellence, then the first thing we have to do is make sure that we're not introducing foreign diseases that could significantly destroy a single producer's operation or the entire industry in some instances. And so our organization and the board, when looking at this, said that part and parcel to a goal of trying to elevate the cattle producer's role in achieving lasting food security is to ensure that we have no outbreaks of foreign animal diseases. And foot and mouth disease is the most contagious disease known to cloven-footed animals, and therefore presents a significant risk. And that disease has circumvented the globe. And yet we are importing from countries where that disease is known to exist. And that poses a significant threat to the cattle producer. But as Tracy just discussed, that's not in the interest of the packers. The packers are trying to be able to source beef from anywhere. And so a relaxation of those protections for the introduction of foreign animal diseases has been opposed for many years. That's why we have, for the first time in history, approval to bring the live foot and mouth disease virus into Manhattan, Kansas for research purposes, even though the studies show that there's a high likelihood of an inadvertent release, and the cause of that release, according to the researchers, would most likely be human error, which you simply can't regulate. That could happen. This disease has catastrophic consequences, and it means we should take every precaution possible to prevent its introduction into the United States, and we've failed to do that. And so as part of maintaining food security, the ability to produce an abundant and uninterrupted supply of food for consumers, we have got to make sure that we achieve the gold standard of health and safety. And that means that we do everything possible to prevent the introduction of foot and mouth disease, the reintroduction of tuberculosis from Mexico that we know is occurring, and brucellosis, both from Mexico and Canada. And so that's part of the plan. Is so we need to look at that seriously as producers and calling Congress and saying, look, we need to preserve and protect the domestic supply chain And you can't do that if you're relaxing standards that could make us more susceptible to these foreign animal diseases.
Tatum, can I jump in on that for just a second?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. If you think like a meat packer for just a minute, what you want is to be able to source your product from wherever. And as long as the North American continent is as free from foot and mouth disease, hoof and mouth disease as it is, and we're one of the very few regions in the world where we don't have it right now. And the reason we don't have it is because we've had an absolutely brutal policy about keeping that virus off our continent. So, but as long as we have that advantage, then we are not, we produce a superior product. And what the packers would like to do is make us just the same as everybody else on the planet. So what they don't really have the problem, I mean, they don't really have the objection to the introduction of foot and mouth disease that producers do. They have they face an entirely different demand curve because they're perfectly willing to sell beef that comes from foot and mouth infected regions. They don't care that it produces catastrophic effects on the animal husbandry end of livestock production. They don't care about that. What they care about is that they can take a box of beef from wherever and they can label it product of the USA, which is a fraud of enormous proportions. Because honest to God, a lot of folks know about this, but a lot of folks don't. They can import a box of beef from Brazil. They can take it out of this box and put it into that box and send it to an American grocery store and call it product of the USA. Now, incredible as that sounds, it's absolutely deceptive to the consumer, and it's really unfair to American beef producers, but they don't care about that. Mm-hmm. So the foot and mouth disease aspect of this is not a big deal to the meat packers the way it is to producers. So as long as American producers have that advantage, we should keep that advantage the best we can. And the only way to do that is to keep that virus off our continent. And it's, I mean, folks may not know this either, but it's transmissible in a box of beef. So you don't need to have a diseased animal in order to make that, a person who opens a box of beef can pick that virus up and transmit it to their animals. So, it's just a matter of time if the policy is that we get to import, if the packers get to import meat from those diseased areas like Brazil and Uruguay and so forth. It's just a matter of time before our cattle get it, and then we lose our advantage. Now, why would we want to do that?
Mm-hmm. Brett Kinsey, our good friend Shad Sullivan, a few months ago actually came on and did a Facebook Live, and it was actually the first day that Namibian beef, or the first week that Namibian beef had crossed our borders. And they are not now Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are not foot and mouth disease free in Namibia. Why is the whole industry not just as mad about this as we are? I mean, as a U.S. producer, does that make you a little nervous, Brett? Because living in Kansas, having foot and mouth disease come into Manhattan, into the heartland of beef country, that's stupid.
Well, I mean, to bounce off what Bill said and what Tracy said, and what we're speaking about here in the long range plan and food security, and you guys stop me if I'm wrong. Let's just look at the Black Swan event in Holcomb. Who lost and who won? Producers lost, processors and retailers won. COVID-19, who lost and who won? Speaking from an economic standpoint in the beef industry, producers lost, packers, retailers won. If foot and mouth disease comes into, well, I mean, first, let's just have a provocative question. Would the people who want to push mandatory ID down our throat and all this standardization, would they purposefully release foot and mouth disease in the United States? And I'm going to answer that. I don't want anybody else to. I don't think they would. But I do think that the track record of what USDA has done and what Congress has allowed them to do, and the presidency with Trade Promotion Authority, they have operated with such carelessness. And what are they going to do when foot and mouth disease ends up here? They're going to go like this. It's called plausible deniability. And who's going to lose? The 100-year genetics, the 200-year, whatever, the people who have put their whole lives, all their equity into this are going to lose. But let's remember one important fact, and this is an important fact that I don't know if I'm absolutely for sure. If we get foot and mouth disease, those animals can be slaughtered.
Mm.
So once again, and I'm not a clairvoyant, it looks to me like it's another big setup for the producer to lose, and you will see your check off and your officials and everybody else come out to assure the public that people have been eating this Brazilian and Namibian beef for years, and it's foot and mouth disease. It's perfectly safe to eat, but we're going to be the ones that are going to suffer this devastating economic loss. And then we're going to be plagued with the production loss. And that's where it ties into the long range plan for food security. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And geez, in this country, we just let things go. We just have a way of moving on to the next thing. And so that's what gets me wound on FMD. Is that correct, Bill? Animals can be slaughtered.
Depopulating the herds is one of the priorities in containing a foot and mouth disease outbreak.
And then, another thing that we don't touch in the beef long range plan or the cattle long range plan is that this is not just cattle. This is any cloven footed animal.
Right.
This is deer. Call your hunters and tell them. I mean, whether it's a matter of the carelessness, my vet told me, and vets all have their opinions. They said, you could go to Brazil, you could take this ballpoint pen and you could touch it to the nose of an animal infected with foot and mouth disease. You could click it, you could put it in your pocket, you could come back through. I almost don't even like saying this, actually. You could click it, you could put it in your pocket, you could come back 3 months later, you could take it out, you could click it, and you could touch it on the nose of an animal and they'd have it. Now, whether that's scientifically correct or not, these are the things that we need to know. And debunk it, make fun of me if it's not true, but geez, people, we're playing with fire on this thing. This is the third black swan in a row. They could take out multi-generational producers all over again. So kind of a hot issue. Yes.
So have we pushed back enough, Bill or Britt? Have we pushed back enough? I know we have Dr. Max, and he's a vet and he's been on our board for years, and he gets very, very passionate talking about foot and mouth disease. And I know that RCAF has been fighting this issue for a long, long time. Do you think that are people just numb to the fact that, well, that could never happen? Because I really thought that we wouldn't see people climbing over the Congress wall and being behind the speaker's desk as well. But that happened today, actually. So what do we do it's in our long range plan. I'm glad it's in our long range plan. How do we, if Tom Vilsack, if he indeed does become Secretary of Ag, how do we genuinely fight this foot and mouth disease battle, Bill? How do we, because I'm not sure really people understand, just like Brett said, it is serious. It's very serious.
Well, importantly, the cattle industry long range plan finally has the steps that we need to take, both short term and long term. And this provides guidance and a outline for producers when they talk to their members of Congress. If more members of Congress hear the concerns from grassroots producers about the risks that we are assuming by relaxing our foot and mouth disease standards, then we will begin to build support for stopping that. And the development of they call it the NBAF, the research facility in Manhattan, Kansas, is way behind schedule. And it could well be that it's behind schedule because there has been sufficient opposition raised ever since that plan was put forth to prevent the foot and mouth disease virus from coming into the United States. So I don't know the actual reasons why that plan has been delayed several times. I just know that it has. And from our perspective, of course, that's a good sign. It gives us more time to implement the provisions of this plan and to get more and more producers to call their members of Congress and said, you can't maintain food security in the United States if you don't have the absolute best disease prevention program in the world. And that's what we want in the United States. In order to have superior cattle, we need a superior disease protection plan. And this is the beginning of that lobbying effort, that effort to create awareness for that need. It's through the plan. And by distributing this plan, which is simple, brief, concise, and producers can read that and use it as a cheat sheet when they pick up the phone and call their members of Congress. And
it sounds like we need to get some of those Kansas legislators working to make sure that we keep that out of Manhattan then, huh? Need to keep that work up.
Wonder if there's any good ones. Are there any good Kansas legislators now? I don't know.
Hey, you be careful.
Let me just throw this in there that, you know, so for folks who might not understand, you know, our foot and mouth research has been conducted on a place called Plum Island. It's off the coast of New York, and you can't get there except for about a 2-day trip. You can't get back. You know, if there's any mammals that show up on that island, they shoot them. And the reason is that they want to contain all the virus research to that location. And the lunacy of moving the research to the very center of the cattle and swine production area in the country, Tornado Alley, Manhattan, Kansas, the very lunacy of moving that research there indicates almost a willful intent to do harm. And you know, the standards that we've talked about, the global standards, those are being promoted by the United Nations and the World Wildlife Fund in large measure. And again, you look at the difference between how packers view the world and how producers view the world. Packers, all of them now, including National Beef, that used to be dedicated to beef production. National was bought by a Brazilian conglomerate called Marfrig, a huge meat packer. But these companies are integrated clear across the protein complex. That is to say that they do beef, they do pork, they do chicken, they do soybeans. Now they're working on alternatives, lab-grown, plant-based protein products. And they don't care if they sell beef or if they sell pork or if they sell chicken or if they don't sell any of those. All they want to be is in the game somewhere. So does it hurt them if there's a massive foot and mouth outbreak in Manhattan, Kansas, and people, because the traditional way of treating foot and mouth outbreaks is this, you know, it's scorched earth. I mean, draw a circle around the infection and nuke it. And you know, the last time we haven't had an outbreak in this country since about 1929, but last time they had one in the United Kingdom, I mean, that's what they did. It was a total scorched earth policy where they destroyed all the animals in that area. You know, they don't want the World Wildlife Fund and the United Nations and many of the other players in the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. They don't want beef production. They see it as a luxury for the masses that is unnecessary for common people to eat good food. They see it as an environmental problem. The environmental footprint of beef is bad for the planet. And they would just as soon do away with it. So imagine if that is their motivation, if that's their ideology. They don't care if there's a foot and mouth outbreak and we have to destroy the cattle herd. That's what they want to do. Mm. So you want to talk about beef security, you talk about from a consumer point of view, you talk about it from a producer point of view. And what consumers want, they want a good product that tastes good, that is at a fair price point to feed their family, that's subject to a robust inspection system. They want to know it's good food. And that's what they believe the United States Department of Agriculture provides them. That's what they think they're getting. Mm-hmm. So they're not involved in the politics, but I can tell you that the packers are. And I believe that they are under starters orders to phase beef production out, and then pork production out, and shift to poultry and plant-based protein sources. Then I believe that that's where they're going.
So why has the industry embraced it? I know I've seen your presentation many times, and you do a fabulous presentation. And if you're watching, which I've been looking at our analytics, and we have had over 60 people watching us continuously. And so thank you so much. Hit the share button, share with your neighbors and friends, because they need to hear what's really happening in the industry. Go to our YouTube channel, the RCAF USA Facebook channel, and you can search Tracy Hunt, Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, or just Tracy Hunt, and look at Tracy's presentation. In that presentation, Tracy, you really talk about the root of how these programs started, how they infiltrated. Maybe that's a better way to say it. How these global standards, this global overtake, or if you will, of these the World Wildlife Fund, the United Nations, how they've just wiggled their way in. How did it happen? I mean,
the way it's happened over since sometime about the mid 70s, 1970s, there was a concentration of power in the banking industry. So there were mergers and acquisitions within the banking industry that led to about, and I'm using round numbers here, but let's say 6 banks in the country that literally control, all the money. Okay. And by merger and acquisition, those banks have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and the number of competitors, or lending competitors, have gotten smaller and smaller. So, and there's a great chart I don't have with me right now, but you can get it at the Federal Reserve Bank that shows those mergers and acquisitions, and leads down to just very few banks. Well, since that time, it's gotten even more concentrated. So what you have is just a handful of banks that are in a position to finance, really basically construct a choke point into the supply chain of essentially every commodity and every service. And so what they've done in the beef industry, and the best example is National Beef. National Beef was bought by Marfrig, as I was talking about earlier. Marfrig is integrated across the whole protein complex. Marfrig bought National Beef, which has one packing plant in Dodge City, Kansas. They bought on a 100% debt deal. So what happened was Rabobank, which is a huge agricultural player from the Netherlands, financed that purchase, and to the exclusion of all others. And now what you have is a wholly owned, controlled group of oligopolists who are beholden to the lending industry. And all those businesses, including Cargill, which is the world's largest privately owned business, that is to say, not publicly traded, those companies are beholden to those lending institutions because they are all dealing with a substantial amount of debt. And what these banks have told them is, if you don't do what we tell you to do, we will lend this money to somebody else and we will starve you of capital. So the World Wildlife Fund finds itself with these people as bedfellows, and is essentially a mask or an environmental front for these international lending institutions. And if you want to ask yourself, who's more powerful, these 6 banks or the United Nations? The answer is the 6 banks. And if you want to know who's more powerful, the 6 banks or the United States government, just look at the corruption that you see in our government at this point. And the answer is who's more powerful? It's the 6 banks. Mm-hmm. So that's how the World Wildlife Fund got themselves in that position. And you just have these pitiful, feckless people at the NCBA that are still sucking off the largesse of American beef producers by their checkoff dollars, and they're taking those checkoff dollars, and they're doing what they're told to do, which is support the packers against the producers. And they would like to think, the packers or the NCBA would like people to believe that we're all just one big happy family, the packers and the producers and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that the packers and the producers are competitors at the negotiating table, and as I mentioned earlier, in two entirely separate industries. So NCBA will take a position in favor of the producers when they absolutely have to, at the risk of insurrection, or otherwise they don't. They take the position of the packers. And it's a sad state of affairs, but they're very well funded, and the producers have to work really hard to ferret out the truth because they're not getting it from the NCBA.
So much. Sorry, Bill. Go ahead.
Brett mentioned that the solution here is to restore competition, to have a free market in which the free market principles can guide individual producers. And as part of the plan that the board has put together, it is to encourage more investment in the packing plants, in more feedlots. And Dave, where you're at up in Ohio, you're outside the beef belt where over 75% of all the feedlots and all the packers are. Just kind of talk on that. What would that do for Ohio and the Northeast if we had more local and regional packers, more investments in the infrastructure for this industry? What impact would that have?
Well, it's funny you say that, because the other day I happened to be up at a small packing facility that does some custom work, and he's all the way out to 2022. So if you need to get a beef butcher, you're out of luck. But as far as competition, I've been telling everybody, if this 3693 Grassley bill goes through, it would open up a whole new market for us, because I talk to people every day, and right now there's a lot of cattle coming in from Iowa and Illinois area, all the way across 900 miles back across Ohio into Pennsylvania to a slaughter plant in Pennsylvania. And I'm thinking, if we get 50% competition, these small little sale barns around here, they're going to start selling some fat cattle again, and we won't be shipping all of our, calves out west.
So that'll increase competition in your area.
Oh boy, will it ever. One other thing, I just wanted to hit on what Tracy was saying there a little bit ago, and he was talking about the bringing in the foreign beef, repackaging it, and putting a label on it. And a lot of people don't understand that the Federal Trade Commission here this summer, I don't know if you can see this or not, they had those comment periods for Made in USA. And this one here is the NCBA's, that they were totally against it. And people need to know that. And here's the North America Meat Institute's reply to that also. And just like Tracy said, they're going to side with the packer every chance they get.
I'm going to unmute here. Sorry, I had a dog that was out of control. Our last point, I want to at least read it. And it's this: shift away from the global standardization and rely instead on free market principles to drive innovation and excellence. The first point is exactly what you said, Dave, which is to encourage investment in the live cattle industry's competitive marketing channels, including investments to address decades-old slaughtering plants, more and more widely dispersed packing plants and feedlots, and to support local and regional livestock auction markets. The second thing is to maximize production and marketing choices for cattle producers by relaxing government and industry efforts to mandate global production standards and certifications as a condition to market access. Brett, let's talk about that.
How can they do that? What gives them the power to push this down upon us? And that's a concentrated marketplace. The concentrated market that has systemically, not completely, but nearly eliminated our competitive markets. I've got my papers here too, Dave, but I'm not nearly as organized. Right here. You want to see the bar graph? One is cash trade in 2005 versus formula trade, and then it's 2018. They transposed in 13 years. We went from a very small amount of formula and a large amount of cash to a very small amount of cash and a large amount of formula. So that means you've got a lot of people competing for kill spaces. And that's exactly how they push all this standardization upon us. If you want to get your cattle killed, you'll do this, this, and this. And I guess that's what I've got to say about it. That is not free market where you are rewarded for better production or higher production. That is a concentrated marketplace, eliminating competition to push what they want down upon producers, not to reward, kind of like BQA was brought up earlier. It's things are held out as it's like me. I raise program cattle, right? We do a lot of paperwork. We do a lot of certification, but that's my information and I sell that. That has value. When that becomes the new standard, everybody will be doing the extra work that I'm doing for free because it becomes a new minimum, a new barrier to entry for some and a new minimum standard for others. So, I mean, really, it's amazing. Tracy Hunt talked about Adam Smith. I'm a fawning fan of Adam Smith, that Scottish philosopher from back in the 1700s. The fact that those guys wrote and read by candlelight and they had it figured out because it's fundamental truth. A competitive market must be maintained for a society to flourish. And we've proved it. We've flourished, up to this point. The cattle industry flourished in 2014 because we had some increased competition because we couldn't do the bait and switch of imported beef being sold as American, in my opinion. I hope that answers that.
Tracy, it does. Tracy Hunt, just to tag onto that, I've heard you say in many, many of your meetings, vertical integration kills competition. And that's exactly what we're saying. We must have competition.
Yeah, that's right. And it kills freedom. The free market they don't call it just a free market for nothing. It's freedom. I mean, it's your freedom to make those decisions and fail if you've made stupid decisions, or succeed wildly if you make great decisions. But vertical integration, just so folks understand this, what that means is that a single entity or a single power has control over the entire production process of a given commodity or service. So if those people in control were to the great example was what Don Tyson did to the poultry business, where he ended up owning every aspect of poultry production, from the eggs and the genetics and the feed and the processing and the kill facilities. They controlled every aspect of it, above and below the actual chicken house where the chickens were born or where they were fed out. And they didn't have to own that. And that's where all the dirty work was. And that's where the risk was in the feeding operation. They just were able to control the parts below and above that. So they were able to dictate to the growers what they'd get for their product and what they'd get for the amount of compensation and their success. They have no freedom whatsoever. So vertical integration, when a company has enough power to vertically integrate, that is to say that they control all aspects of production, including cattle, in our case, the cow-calf operations, the stockers and the feeders. So if they're in a position where they can dictate to us the terms of production and the price that we will get, they actually run your ranch. And that's important to know, that pretty soon those guys are going to be running your ranch. And so, the important things that we've talked about in terms of food security. We absolutely have to have restore our competition. And the only way that's going to happen is if these packers are broken up, that they have to be broken up. And, Sonny Perdue, his brother just lost an election today, yesterday. He was Trump's Secretary of Agriculture, but he was of no help whatsoever to us. I mean, he took the side of the packers every time, and he never saw the producer's point of view. So, but that's what we have to do. We have to break up the packers. And we've got to have a mom and pop pack operation at every intersection the way we used to have it. That was, that you talk about food security. Take the fire that happened in Holcomb, Kansas that Brett was talking about. And that 5% of the production in this country, beef production, was focused on came out of that factory, out of that kill facility. That had way, way, way disproportionate impact on the market. And the same way with this COVID deal, the ones that have shut down due to COVID infection. Why did we let the packing industry get so concentrated? If I was China and I had a bunch of atom bombs, and I would only have to spend 24 of them on packing plants in this country, and we would be totally without beef production. And you'd only have to do 1 or 2 of them before you'd seriously pinch the supply chain. Now, what kind of food security is that? Now, but if you had at every crossroads, you had a pack plant like we had 30 years ago, they wouldn't be able to put us in a box like that. And so if you want food security, what you have to do is go back to more smaller operations. You have to break up the packers, and you got to restore the free market.
Well, between you and your atom bombs and Brett Kinsey and his ballpoint pen, I sure hope we haven't given any bad actors any ideas how to decimate our industry tonight, for heaven's sakes.
I'm sure they've already
And Bill, we've had a question that I think is a good question, and I'd like for you to answer it, please. So it comes from Cody Justice. Cody, I think is from Oregon. I think he's out there. Cody, you can correct me. The NEPA requirements require the BLM and Forest Circus to reconcile their management plans with the plans of the local government. Is there a way to cause USDA to reconcile with this plan? It is a great plan. I have agreed with every aspect, searching for a way to give it teeth. I have zero confidence with lobbying. That's his comment. So the question is there a way to cause the USDA to reconcile with this plan?
Well, that would be a good question for a county commissioner, because I believe that some counties have invoked the authority of the county to cooperate and to coordinate with the BLM in areas where the BLM has land within the county. And so I am not personally familiar with the steps that need to be taken, but indeed there's been a movement in that direction, and it involves coordination between the county with respect to the BLM plan. And there appears to be an obligation on the part of BLM to participate in a meaningful way with the county. And that's about all I know about it without doing some more research.
Okay, he just responded, coordination. Well, we are at that hour mark, and I just want to, let's do just a quick wrap up with any last comments you might have. Dave Hyde, we'll start with you. Or if you're good, you can pass the torch, no problem. But thank you so much for being on. And
what I'd like to add is, I mean, it's a little off our topic tonight, but every producer out there, they need to get on there and sign that petition for the checkoff referendum. And they can get a hold of me, Brett, anybody at RCAF, or checkoffvote.com, I believe.
yes, sir.
And that's going to be a start. We need to send a message to this industry that we ain't fooling around. Anybody that's interested in RCAF from, I'm going to say any state, reach out to us. You know, we talk to people every day. When I first met Brett, I think his phone was glued to his ear most of the time. And now mine's getting to be that same way. But that's the only way we find out what's going on around this country, is to talk to other producers. So reach out to us, and maybe we can help you out.
Brett Kinsey.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to hit on that was under strengthening the cattle industry's role in food security is, I'll just read it, to increase the production of beef produced exclusively from cattle born, raised, and harvested in the United States to at least equal the volume of US beef consumption. Now, if I am correct, I was born in 1972, and at no time in my lifetime have we been able to meet demand of US consumers with domestically produced beef. But yet, as we market our cattle, we're told they're too big, they're too plentiful, the long list of stories. So it would appear to me that it's a man-made problem. If we have a supply problem, it is a man-made problem. And that would directly become a food security problem. If we're not growing enough beef to satisfy domestic demand, that is a food security problem. So when I ask people to look at this plan, and I've sent it to a lot of people, send it to your congressman, state and local, send it to your governors, send it to your sale barn owners, send it to everybody that you think will read it, your rural business owners. And when they read it, I challenge them to say, as you go through this line by line, stop when you get done reading it and say, is this too much to ask? Because that we should be able to grow enough beef in this country to feed ourselves, and the fact that we do not is a man-made problem. And is it too much to ask of our policymakers and the people that run this country and are supposed to lead us and represent us, that we should be allowed to grow enough beef in this country to feed ourselves? And so that's my final soapbox. Thank you.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Tracy Hunt, final words from you.
Well, I think everybody's just made a lot of great points, and there's just so much more to talk about. I don't know how I would address it all in any kind of final summary, but in terms of the country of origin labeling, which is, I think, really important. Are you kidding me that I'm a producer, or I'm a consumer? Let's say because I'm both. I'm a consumer, and I go to the grocery store, and I don't get to know where my beef comes from. And that's the situation that consumers are in. I mean, I get to know where my T-shirts are made, and where my socks are made, and where my carburetor is built. But the fundamental building block of a human body, protein, I do not get to know that as a consumer. And that is just unacceptable. And not only will consumers pay more for American beef because they see it as a better product, and it is. It's grown by people they know, and it's subject to a robust inspection system. That's what they want. Mm-hmm. But they don't get to know that. They're in a position where they may be eating anything. And that, a couple of years ago, there was all kinds of problems with the inspection system in Brazil, and the corruption and the disease. And they were treated with Dectomax to a point where they exceeded the legal requirement of anti-parasite, and just the United States government responded by increasing the standard. So, we should get to know, as consumers and as producers, we should get to know what we're doing. And I just can't believe that legislators that were informed wouldn't be able to advance that cause. And I mean, there's 20 other things we can talk about. I just wanted to throw that out. I'm not sure we covered that well enough.
Well,
Great job, Dave. Thank you.
thank you so much for being with us tonight, Tracy. I find myself learning something every time that I hear you speak, and I just really appreciate the effort it took for you to be able to get on with us. And Dave, hi, thank you. Went and got an iPad for this, for heaven's sakes. This is your Zoom debut. Thank you for being with us. And Brett Kinsey, I tell you what, never get tired of hearing the things that you bring to the table, and you just have such a raw and authentic way of telling our story. And I appreciate you so much. Bill Bullard, I'm going to end with you. We had just a couple of questions here. And I think this is such a good one, and it has to do with the importing and the exporting and not being able to produce enough beef, just as Brett had talked about, in order to feed our country. The question came right after Brett spoke, which is this: if we're not growing enough beef to meet domestic demand, why are we exporting beef? Bill?
Back to what Tracy said, because that certainly benefits the beef packers to be able to export. And the problem is we've lost the relationship between the higher value of those exports and the price of the cattle that the producers receive. And so there's been a complete disconnect. But as Brett described, the inability for our industry to have even met domestic consumption for the past 40 years is indeed man-made. That's one of the constraints imposed upon the industry that provide the multinational meat packers with tremendous leverage over the industry. And for producers who about 15 to 20% of their income is derived from the sale of cull cows and bulls, we see a lot of that grinding product, the lean product, coming into this country, depressing the price of the cull cow market here in the US. That is all a part of this, the complexity of the industry is keep the industry lacking an opportunity to expand, which we should be able to do because we're not able to produce for our own market. And that's all an issue of supply and demand that our industry is being insulated from. And so that's why this plan talks, in fact, it has a goal that by 2025, we want at least 90% of the beef consumed in America to have been produced in America. So this plan contemplates growing the industry, providing an incentive to grow the industry, and even to conduct research on how can we produce more lean beef right here in America so that we're not dependent on foreign countries from anywhere. And then exports would be more of a demand enhancer that the producers can benefit directly from. But right now, there's an export market. The fact that the US industry has produced the best beef in the world under the best of conditions without adopting global standards, and they've earned the reputation the world over. Our beef is coveted the world over. What we need to do as an industry is figure out, well, how can producers benefit from that reputation that they themselves have established? Or has that too been transferred beyond further downstream in the supply chain? But the real question is we know without any question today that our industry failed to provide consumers with an abundant, uninterrupted supply of beef during this COVID pandemic. So we need to make sure that never happens again. And the question is, whose responsibility is it to come up with the solutions and to actually implement solutions? And as producers, unfortunately, this industry has left that to someone else to do. And we can't do that anymore. And that's what was the impetus of this plan, is the board members decided, we need a plan together for producers so producers can begin shaping the new direction of this industry that absolutely has to happen. And this is the first step, the very first step.
It is a very comprehensive plan, and we plan as this new congressional delegation gets ready to start, that we will be able to, Grassley hopefully will be able to introduce his bill again. Hopefully we can get, Tracy, to your point, some congressmen and senators We already have had interest to carry country of origin labeling bill. So exciting things ahead, big things ahead in order to start checking some things off of this list. Again, if you're watching tonight, thank you so much. We have had 40, 50, 60 people during this last hour, and we appreciate you spending time with us. If you're a producer, we would ask you, please join your voice with ours. The reason it's important is because when we do go to DC and we have these pieces of legislation and they ask us, how many people do you represent? It's important. I had a lobbyist, actually not a lobbyist, it was a politician. It was a congressman this week say to me, you know, if you want to make an impact, he goes, we really don't care if it's a canned response or not. He goes, if we receive one email, nah. He goes, but if we receive 15 emails or 100 emails on that same topic, he goes, we start to look at that, what that is, and we have to deal with that. And so I would urge you, please contact your congressmen, your senators. It's an interesting time in history, but it's history is being made every day, and it's incumbent upon us to, my friend Brett Kinsey, he says this all the time, we might be casualties in this war, but we won't be victims. The only way we won't is if we fight back. So please join us, r-cafusa.com /membership. It's $50 a year to join. I think I said a month last week, $50 a year to join. We would love to have you. We have over 6,000 members in 42 states, and we're just the grassroots voice of cattle producers in America, working to stay profitable and independent. So again, thanks for joining us. Fellas, thanks for joining us tonight. Next week, we will have a wrap up on our series and really go over these 6 points. And we're excited to have been able to share this with you tonight. If you have any questions, never hesitate to reach out to us. Again, thanks so much and good night.
Aye.
Good night.